Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is the most important hospital contract term for employers and employer-sponsored health plans. So, in casinos, there's this term called a whale. And a whale is a high roller. That's somebody who comes in the casino and they bet huge amounts on blackjack or roulette or whatever other game they're playing. Now, those whales are super important to a casino because the profit from one whale, because of course when they bet a lot, they lose a lot. And so the profit that the casino makes off of one whale is greater than like 1,000 other gamblers. So to a certain extent, all those people that you might see at a casino, they're like child's play. And it's really like the whale that really matters to the casino. Now, for hospitals, there's the equivalent of the whale, where in order for a hospital to meet their monthly and yearly financial goals in terms of revenue and profit, they need to have a patient whale. And what is the patient equivalent of a whale? It is a high-cost hospital stay, inpatient, with a patient that has employer-sponsored commercial insurance. So a very high-cost inpatient stay, plus the patient has employer-sponsored commercial insurance. And that gives you a whale. Let me give you some examples. So for a complex like coronary artery bypass graft, which is DRG 235. And note, I'm using DRGs because again, for inpatient hospital stays, you don't bill off an ICD-10 and a CPT code. No, you bill off of the DRG, okay? So, or like a scoliosis surgery, which is DRG 456. Or an ICU stay for sepsis on the ventilator, which is DRG code 870, where like the billed charges for the CABG might be $800,000. The billed charges for the scoliosis surgery, which is a lateral curvature of the spine, is $500,000. And the billed charges for the ICU stay for sepsis plus being on a ventilator might be like $400,000. So this is where the hospital insurance contract comes into play. So it's not just a patient that has high billed charges, it's the fact that for their commercial insurance network, the hospital has negotiated what is referred to as a provider stop loss. And this is hugely important. So the major hospital system, they hold on to these provider stop loss clauses when they're negotiating with an insurance carrier. Now note, it's a stop loss for the hospital, okay? So this has nothing to do with like stop loss insurance that an employer might have, okay? This is the hospital is trying to stop themselves from losing money when they have these very high cost hospitalizations. Okay, so the way that a provider stop loss contract term works is when the hospital system and the insurance company sit down to negotiate their contract, the hospital says, look, we'll accept a fixed case rate for a CABG or scoliosis or sepsis up to a certain level of billed charges. And we'll call that level of billed charges X. And that level of X is different for the CABG versus the scoliosis versus the sepsis. Okay. However, should the billed charges exceed X, then we, the hospital, are no longer going to be paid a fixed case rate, but instead will be reimbursed 70% of billed charges. Now that's 70%, it can vary. At some hospital systems it might be 80%, at other hospital systems it might be 50%. But the point is that as soon as you exceed X plus $1, then the reimbursement from the insurance company, really the self-funded plan in many cases, immediately dramatically increases to only a third, if you're paying 70% of billed charges, that's only a 30% discount off of billed charges. So let's go through some specific examples. So for that CABG, let's say that the provider stop loss provision said that the hospital will be paid $80,000 as long as billed charges are less than $200,000. However, as soon as you exceed $200,000, then the reimbursement changes to 70% of billed charges. Okay, well in the example there, where the CABG was $800,000 of billed charges, well then $800,000 times 70% means that the hospital is now going to be paid $560,000. Look at that. Because of that stop-loss clause, the reimbursement went from $80,000 to $560,000. Okay, next example. For the scoliosis surgery, the provider stop-loss clause might say, okay, the hospital will accept a fixed case rate of $70,000 up to billed charges of $150,000. Well, in this example here, the billed charges were $500,000. So you take the $500,000 times a 70% reimbursement rate for billed charges, and that means that the scoliosis surgery then paid out at $350,000. Look at that. The provider stop-loss caused the payment to go from $70,000 to $350,000. Okay, in our final example, for the sepsis, the provider stop-loss contract might say, okay, the hospital will accept $60,000 as the fixed case rate up to billed charges of $80,000. However, once the billed charges exceed $80,000, then they'll be paid at 70%. So in this case, it was a $400,000 ICU stay, and $40,000 times 70% means that the hospital was paid $280,000. Look at that. It went from $60,000 to $280,000. Now, here is where it gets interesting. So, what determines the billed charges? Well, all the billed charges come from the Chargemaster, the list of all the different, what the hospital charges for all the different things in the hospital. And so, and I'll leave a link to my Chargemaster video in the show notes. So, what the hospital system does is they specifically set the dollar amounts in the Chargemaster. They're tailored so that for certain DRGs that the hospital has negotiated these stop-loss provisions for, the billed charges associated with those DRGs are tailored so that they exceed the stop-loss rate almost every time. So, in other words, it's almost impossible to get a CABG done for less than $200,000 in billed charges. It's almost impossible to get a scoliosis for less than $150,000, and it's almost impossible to have an ICU stay for sepsis for less than $80,000. So these case rates here of $80,000, $70,000, and $60,000 are totally irrelevant because they're never paid by the insurance company. They're always reimbursed at 70% of billed charges. And again, for all you self-funded employers out there, that's coming out of your pocket. And and just to make things even more confusing, if you yourself have stop-loss insurance, well then this is hitting your specific stop-loss level. The specific stop-loss insurance carrier is paying for this, and then your stop-loss premiums are going up next year. So, this brings up a very important maxim in business, all business, including the healthcare business, which is one person's revenue is another person's cost. So in this case, the hospital's revenue is the employer-sponsored plan's costs. And when an employer-sponsored plan looks at their healthcare costs, what always drives their trend, what always drives their healthcare cost inflation is the high-cost claimants. It is these provider stop-loss clauses in the contract is one of the main reasons why these high-cost claimants exist and why these high-cost claimants continue to drive the healthcare cost inflation of your plan. So, fine. Fantastic. Thank you for the education, Dr. Bricker. What in the world am I going to do about it? Okay, the key is to keep your plan members out of the hospital. And there are a couple of ways to do this, especially as it relates to CABGs and scoliosis surgery and ICU stays for sepsis. One is through prevention. What can you do to decrease the cardiovascular risk of your population such that they don't need to have CABGs? Okay, and the next is with direct contracting. So, this is where, whether it's the Walmart example of direct contracting with centers of excellence or whether it's direct contracting with an ambulatory surgery center, yes, the person might still absolutely 100% need to have the scoliosis surgery and should have the scoliosis surgery done, but have it done either with a direct contract that is not based off of provider stop loss or is done at another setting that is much more cost effective than a large hospital system that has a provider stop loss in it. So there you go. Little did you know. See, it's like gravity. You can't see it, but it profoundly impacts all of us. That is the most important hospital contract term that all of us need to be aware of. And thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.